Bible history fact kind of question. So think about this one, okay? Think about the Old Testament. Think about the history of the people of Israel. And let me ask you this question. Which one, no, don't answer it just yet, okay? Think about it. Which came first? The Exodus from Egypt, after the 10 plagues and all that. Which came first, the Exodus from Egypt or the giving of the law at Mount Sinai? Which one of those two came first? Anybody want to be brave and... Okay, I've got two Exoduses. Two Exodi, is that the way to pronounce it, the plural of Exodus? Okay, and that is correct. It was the Exodus. Now, I want you to think about that because, and I've mentioned this before, but it's been a very long time. It is important for us to understand that the Exodus is probably the single most important redemptive event in the history of Israel. In fact, if you go through the book of Psalms and read various Psalms, you will see over and over and over again mention of God redeeming his people, bringing them out of slavery, bringing them out of Egypt, overcoming the Pharaoh, drowning Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea. That God heard their prayer. This is what he says to Moses. I have heard the prayers of my people Israel, and I have remembered the covenant that I made with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And that goes all the way back to Genesis 12, the first 3 verses. And that covenant that God makes with Abraham, that Abraham is going to be the father of many nations. Through Abraham, all the nations of the world will be blessed. He will be a blessing. Whoever blesses you, I will bless. Whoever curses you, I will curse. That whole promise to Abraham there in Genesis 12, which is officially installed as a covenant in Genesis 15, and it's then reiterated to Abraham's son Isaac and Abraham's grandson Jacob. In fact, Jacob, after he wrestles with the Lord, becomes known as Israel or Yisrael, which in Hebrew means one who rules with God or one who struggles with God. And so the promise to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob is reiterated. And God says to Moses, 400 years after the Israelites go down to Egypt, Joseph and his family, he says, I've heard the prayers, and I remember the covenant that I made. The Exodus is the consummate or the ultimate saving, delivering event in the Old Testament. Then God takes the people of Israel out to the desert, out to Mount Sinai. And there he gives them his law. Now, of course, a lot of things happened, a lot of things transpired. You know, the whole thing with the golden calf episode and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, God gives them his law. Now, it's important for us to realize, and if you don't remember in some respects anything else I say this morning, remember this, okay? God gave the people of Israel his law, not as a means by which they could become his people. Instead, God gave the people of Israel his law because they already were his people by virtue of what he had done for them at the Exodus. The law is a crowning gift. This is my law. I want you to have this because you are mine. I have redeemed you. I have made you mine, and this is how I want you to live. I don't want you to live like the nations around you live. I don't want you to live like all those nations that surround you live. I don't want you to live in all sorts of perversion. Read the Holiness Code in Leviticus 18 to 26, for example. I don't want you to live like that. I want you to be holy. I want you to be godly. I want you to be holy because I'm holy, Leviticus 11:44. And in that holiness, I want you to have the blessing and the beauty of that holiness. So when we ask the question, who may dwell in your holy mountain? We must never lose sight of the fact that Israel is constituted as God's people by virtue of God's grace. Sometimes we don't remember that. Sometimes we take a verse like, well, the law came through Moses, but grace and truth come through Jesus Christ. That's what the Gospel of John says. As though those are totally exclusionary categories. Believe me, beloved, there's plenty of grace in the law that God gives to Moses. Read Psalm 119, all 176 verses of it. And you will find that the psalmist, who we think, we aren't exactly sure, but it could be Ezra. It's very possible it could be Ezra. But Ezra speaks of delighting in God's law, loving God's law. Lord, I admire you. I love your statutes and your precepts and your commandments and your laws. The law of God is not a bad thing. And I'd be happy to discuss this with you, but about 100 and some years ago, there was a very early edition of the Schofield Reference Bible that came out. And there was a footnote in the Schofield Reference Bible that God offered Israel his law, and they accepted it. And the footnote said, Israel rashly accepted the law of God. What? No, that's just wrong, okay? The law was a gift of God's grace. They received the law of Moses at Mount Sinai, not as a means by which they could become God's people, but because they already were. So it's not that God gives them his law and says, okay, here's the bar, jump over it, you're in. Okay? Some of you probably have struggled in your growing up years where sometimes your acceptance by family, by parents, or by others was performance-based. Okay? Do this. It's the equivalent of your parents saying to you, okay, don't make me look bad. When you do this, when you do that, I want to be able to, point to you and say, yeah, that's my kid. And we've all had that, and some of us have had some counseling over that a little bit. Okay? Not that I'm mentioning anybody in particular, but anyway. But yeah, God's acceptance of you is not based on your performance. It is based upon his grace. Now, he will work with you, okay? He has standards and he has expectations. It's sort of like being born into a family and you're given the family name. And we want to make sure then that you live up to that name. So you were born and you were given that name, and your place in the family is guaranteed and assured by your birth. Right? That's not going to change. But you have to understand, if you're going to be a part of this family, and you are going to be a part of this family, that there are expectations. We want you to be the best that you can be because you are one of us. It's unconditional love that always strives and tries to make you better. Is there a little bit of a tension there? Sure. Sure there is. Right? It's not that your parents are going to throw you out if you don't do this, but on the other hand, it's like there's some stuff we need to talk about. There's some issues we need to address. So Psalm 15 does that. It asks the question, Lord, who may dwell in your holy mountain? That's a good question. Let's take a look at it. It's a very brief psalm. It's only 5 verses. Terry already read it for us, but let's take a look at it again. It's good to have it reiterated. Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent? Who may live on your holy mountain? It's really 2 ways of saying the same thing. The mountain is Mount Zion. The tent refers to the tabernacle. Mount Zion refers to the place where the temple is, the 2 phases of God's dwelling with his people. Right? So here is what is expected of people who have been recipients of God's grace and who have been recipients of God's law. This is what they should be characterized by. These are not entrance requirements. These are requirements that are placed on us because we're already in, because we've been admitted to the family of God by God's grace. Now this is how we're supposed to live. The one whose walk is blameless. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Who does what is righteous, who speaks truth from their heart, whose tongue utters no slander, who does no wrong to a neighbor, and casts no slur on others. So if you look at verse 2 is kind of a set of positive statements. This is what a person who dwells in the sacred tent of God, who lives in his holy mountain, this is what a person who's a part of God's family is to look like. Their walk is blameless, they do what's righteous, they speak truth from the heart. Those are all positive things. Verse 3 is negative things. They don't utter slander. They do not do any wrong to a neighbor. And they cast no slur on others. We might say they don't cast aspersions. They don't raise doubt. Yeah, I was talking to so-and-so, and I think he's a great guy. Well, I know something you don't know. Really what? Oh, well, I better not say. And you raise doubt in people's mind. Oh, if you only knew what I know. What do you know? Well, I really don't. It's my place to say. who despises a vile person. This is one we got to think about a little bit. I thought we were supposed to love our enemies. Okay? Well, yeah, we can do that, and we can also struggle with what a vile person says and does, who honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps an oath even when it hurts. I have a real benign example of that from my own experience. I imagine that there's others of you that have had other ones too. Does not change their mind. Who lends money to the poor without interest, who does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Whoever does these things will never be shaken. So the psalm starts with a question. Who is worthy? Who is worthy to dwell in the tent or on the mountain of the Lord? Remembering that God called his people out of Egypt through the Exodus, and that he gave them his law as a sovereign gift of his grace. Okay? So the key question is, really, what kind of person can enter God's presence? Now, we're all in God's presence all the time because God is everywhere, but this is a relational thing, right? So we sometimes talk about as believers, well, we are indwelt by the Holy Spirit, as though the Holy Spirit somehow occupies our physical body. That's a metaphor. It's really talking about a relationship because God's everywhere. The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, they're everywhere. What kind of person enter God's presence? So who is worthy? Who is worthy to be in God's presence? Or maybe another way to put it is, what does a man or woman of God look like? I'm not talking about this, okay? Not much we can do about this, okay? But what does a man or woman of God look like? How do we live? How do we walk? What traits truly characterize a godly person? I mentioned in a message a few weeks ago that I really want for individuals who come to First Baptist or Calvary as well, because we're in the same building, and we overlap a lot in a lot of ways. They'll run into various ones of us. What should they see when they walk in? Well, they should see a little bit of heaven. They should say, oh, that's what heaven's going to be like. Okay. I wondered about that. So I come off the streets of Muskegon, or I drive in from Whitehall, or I come from Fremont, or I come from Norton Shores, or all these other places, and I show up here, and it's like, yeah, I only went a few miles, but it feels like I've gone into a whole different dimension because I feel like I've entered a little bit of heaven. That's a challenge, isn't it? Now, just for what it's worth, I have a hunch that I would like to think that when we get to heaven, when we live on the new heaven, new earth, that there will still be gifts of teaching and that sort of thing. But if that's true, okay, and if I get to go to the new heaven, new earth and do some teaching, if we're having church one day in the new heaven, new earth, and I get up to teach, and all of a sudden Jesus shows up and says, well, it's my day to be with you guys. Andy, do you mind if I do the sermon today? Not at all, sir. You go right ahead. And the rest of you will say, oh, please, please do it, okay? We had enough of him before this, What traits characterize a godly person? In other words, what does a Christian look like? Now, the psalmists don't use the word Christian because of the era that it's from, but it's the same basic ideas. What does a Christian look like? What does my life look like? What does it mean for me to be a person who is worthy to dwell in God's presence? How has the transforming grace, and that's what grace is. Grace is transformational. Grace isn't just, oh, okay, I'll let you go, Grace isn't like Grandpa at Christmas time, Well, Dad, I don't know if you should give Junior his Christmas present this year because he's just been a little hellion all year, And Grandpa says, oh, no, that's all right. I'll just give him whatever, And if he's trouble, I'll just give him back to you guys, back to the parents. No, this is not talking about that sort of thing. Okay? Grace is transformational. Grace changes us. Grace is probably in some ways equivalent to what we typically call tough love. Right? So what does a Christian look like? Being a part of the family of God. Okay, we have this, and I've mentioned this before, at places like Cornerstone or high schools, they have this ceremony called commencement. And the word commencement means beginning. That's when it starts. So you take all those classes, all those tests, all those papers, all that reading, all that studying, so you can start now. Okay? Now's when the work really begins. It's preparation. Well, coming to Christ is commencement. It's the beginning. The rest of our life is being discipled, is being grown, is being matured. And guess where that happens? It happens largely in community. You look at the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, okay? Peace among ourselves, patience with one another. I have a really easy time being patient with me. Very easy time being patient with me. Now, some of you, not so sure, right? And you would say the same thing. We would all say the same thing, right? We all can excuse all the little quirks and weird things that we do. It's when others do them that we have a problem. And that's just typical. Okay? That's who we are. So what does a Christian look like? Well, let's take a look at this, okay? First of all, in verse 2, it says the person whose walk is blameless. Blameless. Now, what does this mean? This same word in our English Bibles is used in the New Testament of an elder. He should be one who is blameless. Doesn't mean he's perfect. These passages, I think, distinguish between my intention and my action. Right? So if you come to me and say, Andy, I really think that what you said or what you did in this situation was hurtful. Right? And I just want you to know that. You need to know that. Now, if you know that my intention was not to hurt you, if I know that my intention was not to hurt you, I just was clumsy. Okay? I just said something or did something that wasn't particularly, I didn't think it through. Okay? That's very different from if all along my intention was deliberately to harm you and you caught me. Okay? In the first instance, we can get through it. It might not be easy. I don't know about you. I never I always worry about it when somebody comes to me, Pastor, I need to talk to you. Okay. And I will typically say, well, what about? Let me know. Well, I need to talk to you, but I can't do it until Friday. So I guess no sleep for me this week, kind of thing. So can you at least tell me what is it? Well, it's this. Oh, okay, all right. Thank you. I can think about that, and by all means, we'll have that conversation. That's very different than if somehow you have evidence or you believe that I'm deliberately, maliciously opposed to you. Okay? This is what it means to be blameless. Blameless people have pure hearts, but they just kind of screw up every once in a while. And if they have an attitude, they're not necessarily aware of it, and that attitude needs to be corrected. We need to be blameless, and I think what that means, so if you come to me and say, you said this, you did that, and I was really deeply hurt by it, I was bothered by it, okay? If you do that, then I can respond to that and say, well, it wasn't my intention, it really wasn't, but maybe I'm just not seeing things clearly. Right? I had a conversation with a couple of my colleagues, counterparts at Calvary this week, and I said, if you came to me and said, I don't like what you said in this way, and I think it was hurtful, my response might be, well, I don't think I said anything hurtful, but if I did, let me listen, because I may not fully perceive everything that's going on. I may be missing something. There may be some blind spots. Okay? That's what it means to be blameless. You're open to correction. You're open to conversation. You're open to the idea that I think I'm okay, but I'm not really necessarily the best one to judge. I was playing golf with my son this week, if that's what you want to call it, okay? My swing has gone to places I didn't even know existed, and it's horrible right now. Gee, I need lessons. It's just really bad, And my son is standing there at the tee, and he says, well, he's got his phone. He says, let me film you. Let me do a video of you while you're hitting your tee shot, and we'll play it back in slow motion and look at it. The only thing worse than looking at your swing is looking at your swing in slow motion, because all those horrible details are all there. And I don't want to look at that. I don't want to see it. But on the other hand, I have to see it if I'm serious about becoming a little bit better at golf. Okay? What's wrong? Why is this club supposed to hit the ball 250 yards and I hit it 30? Okay? What's wrong? What's going on? That's a little bit about the way we are. That's why we have those conversations. They're not fun conversations necessarily, but they're important. Those whose walk is blameless. Are you open to being corrected by others? Are you willing to listen? Maybe there's something in your swing that you just don't see. Maybe there's something in your Christian life and you think it's just fine and it feels good and everything, but it just, no, it's just a problem. When you start hearing the same thing from multiple people, if that happens to you, that's unsolicited, then maybe there's a genuine problem being identified here. The person who does what is righteous, that's pretty simple, okay? The person who is blameless will do what is righteous, and if they don't, they're open to being corrected. They're open to being confronted. So the person who does what is righteous. Thirdly, the person who speaks truth from the heart. Okay? And this is all one verse, and these all go together. Right? Sincerity is what matters the most. Because sincerity is really a form of love, right? Sincerity is just, it's transparentness, it's being honest, it's being right out there. I don't have any ulterior motive, there's no hidden motive, I'm not trying to be deceptive, I'm just putting it all out there. This is who I am. Okay? So I speak truth from the heart. I can tell you right now that if you sensed, or if you have sensed, or if you ever sensed, that what I'm doing up here is not really coming out of a love for all of you, that will greatly and profoundly affect what goes on during this half an hour, 35, 37, 38 minutes on Sunday. That's the way it is, okay? If it's not, again, it's that old saying, you don't care how much I know until you know how much I care. It's true. I mean, I could have all the expertise in the world, but especially in a pastoral relationship, if it's not genuinely, truly spoken, not just speaking truth, okay? Speaking truth from the heart. This is kind of the New Testament or the Old Testament equivalent of the New Testament phrase that talks about speaking the truth in love. Because I can speak the truth. You can speak the truth. You can do it in a very unloving way. On the other hand, you can speak to me and your love for me can so overpower that you don't really say what needs to be said or what you really want to say. It's awkward. It's difficult to say. Confrontation of any kind is never fun. Speaking the truth from the heart, speaking the truth in love is what we have to do. The choir has sung that song for us a couple times. I love it, okay? Speak the truth in love. So this is what a person who dwells in the presence of God looks like. Their walk is blameless. They're not perfect, but they're open to correction when it comes. They do what is righteous. They do the right thing, and they also speak truth from the heart, right? What else is true of this person? Verse 3. Well, this is a person whose tongue does not speak any slander. I'll just put all three of these up together so we can move along here. The person who does no wrong to a neighbor and the person who casts no slurs. It is very, very important for us to understand that our words are very powerful. Whoever said, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me," is an idiot, okay? That's very harmful words. I shouldn't say that. But true, okay? The fact is, words can hurt. Okay? And as I've said before, if, as an example, let's say whether it's me or whether it's someone else, you observe something in my life or someone else's life that is a concern to you. Well, what do you want? You want that person, myself or someone else, to stop doing what is harmful, and you want them instead to do what is helpful, all right? But all too often, we go and respond to someone else. Well, you know what the pastor said today? You know what he did today? You know what so-and-so said? You know what such a person said? You know what this person said? What this person did? No, what'd they do? Oh, they did this, okay? Now, how is taking that to a third party helping to correct the person in whom you've seen the fault? It's not. It's not helping at all. Okay? If you have an issue with me and you don't come and talk to me about it, how is that going to help me be better? It's not. It's just going to, misery loves company, right? Yeah, I feel the same way too. Oh, okay, well then I guess we both must be right. Maybe you are. But how am I, how are you, how is anybody else going to get better if we don't have those conversations? So that's hard to do. Yeah. The right thing is often the hardest thing to do. I think I've heard someone say that once before. The right thing and the hardest thing are often the same thing. So the person who doesn't speak any slander and then also doesn't cast any slurs. We have an interesting phrase in English. I hope this doesn't offend you when I use it, but it's the phrase is damning with faint praise. You ever heard that? It's not really saying something bad. It's just sort of saying, I had the opportunity to be in a play a number of years ago, and the person that wrote the review of the play referred to my performance as competent. He did a competent job of portraying this character, okay? Now, this was after giving glowing reports on the other, there were 3 of us in the play, giving glowing reports on the other 2, and my performance was competent, okay? Yeah, whatever, all right? Well, maybe it wasn't a slur or a slander, but it was certainly damning with faint praise. Okay? It was saying as little as one could say and still being polite. Okay? We do that with each other sometimes. You know, we are a unique cast of characters here at First Baptist. Did you know that? And you know what else? We're just like every other church in that way. We're absolutely like every other church. I mean, I could tell you, I sometimes sit and I think, when I got nothing better to do, I sit in my office and I think of one of you, and I think of somebody else in my former church, and I say, yep. They look different, the names are different, but that kind of person, okay? It's just who we are, okay? We're all unique. We all have our struggles and our difficulties and our challenges. We're all that way, okay? And that's the way it is with your pastor, okay? I'm not Dennis Henderson. I'm not John Brown. I mean, not that anybody else has ever said to me, why can't you be, you know, nobody has, to be honest with you. Nobody has. But those guys were great, wonderful. They were men of God who were here at the time that God brought them here. And, yeah, we all have our issues, right? We all have our struggles, every one of us. If you don't think you have any issues, make an appointment with me. I'll tell you what they are. And then while you're there, you can tell me what mine are. But the one who dwells in the house does not speak slander, doesn't gossip, doesn't run someone else down behind their back. What benefit does that do other than make you feel better somehow? You share that with somebody else. Yeah, I feel the same way too. Yeah, so do I. So somehow there's safety in numbers in that regard. Okay? The person who does no wrong to a neighbor, and Jesus, remember how Jesus defined a neighbor? Anybody that needs you. So the person who casts no slurs, be careful what you say. Be careful what you say about others. Be careful what you say about each other. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a candid and honest opinion. Okay? Like I said, we're a unique group. None of us are the same. We all have our issues. We all have our faults. But, you know, what does the Bible say? Love covers a multitude of sins. Multitude of shortcomings. Verse 3, again, the person who does not speak any... Oh, I think I had that slide twice. I'm sorry about that. Well, you've already seen that. Here we go. Next slide. Here we go. Verse 4, okay? Who may dwell, okay? The one who despises a vile person but honors those who fear the Lord. I think it's important to have those 2 phrases in conjunction with one another. Okay? Who despises vileness, okay? But honors those who fear the Lord. And here he's not talking about someone in the community of God's people when he says a vile person. He's talking about someone who is outside, but in contrast, honors those who fear the Lord. So we have to have our honest opinions about some of the evil stuff that goes on in this world. You know, the toxicity of our political climate in this country is probably unprecedented, whatever your politics are. We've gone way beyond discussing issues. We don't discuss political issues. We just discuss personalities. And that's, I don't care who you are, okay? I don't care whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever. We don't. We don't discuss issues anymore. We just talk about the person. The one who keeps an oath even when it hurts and does not change their mind. I used to referee basketball for about 30 years, and I was working in Kentucky, and Kentucky, you know, I would say that in Kentucky, basketball is a religion. That's not true. It's much more than that, actually, in Kentucky, and they'll tell you that. A lot of them tell you that. And I had the opportunity, I was selected of all the officials in the county to work the county championship tournament. But I'd already committed to another game for that night. And in all honesty, it was a lot less money. but I'd give him my word. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I thought about ways that I could get out of it, but no. Okay. So think about you. When you make a promise, that's really what an oath is. Okay? Do you keep it? Even if it's painful? Okay? Even if it means you made a promise. So, who may dwell? Verse 5. This is interesting because this is not a subject that typically comes up among us. We have all kinds of places that lend money, banks and other sorts of things. Watch out for some of them, okay? There used to be a company that advertised on TV for a year or two for loans, and it was a Native American company, but they are a separate nation, so they didn't come under the laws of the U.S. You know, not like the bank down the street, okay? And I actually went to, and I read all the fine print, and you could borrow up to $10,000 from these people, and they would charge you, their interest rate was 199%. Yep. And you had a maximum payment. So when you made your payments, there was a certain, in addition to the interest, there was a basic fee that was charged. And I did the math, and I'm pretty good at math, okay? I'm pretty good at math. I really am. I mean, I'm sorry, I should sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but I'm pretty good at math, okay? And I ran the numbers, and I found out that if you borrowed $10,000 from these people, that you would end up repaying them $64,000. Yeah. You don't see that anymore, okay? Now, we don't do that. We typically do not do that. In fact, you know, the whole idea of lending money to others, especially family, right? We've had those conversations before. But the idea is that you don't charge it. This is what the Israelites. Now, the law of Moses said you can charge interest to others outside of your own nation, but not to those in your family. You don't take advantage of them. You don't use their challenging times to line your pockets. That means that when you have an opportunity, you go out of your way to help others without expecting something in return. Your attitude toward others is a selfless attitude, a loving, selfless attitude. Finally, the one who does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Again, this is talking about rulers and leaders of the people. And remember, Jesus has the parable of the unjust judge, all that sort of thing. But what are some ways that we tend to move in certain circles because they do more for us than we do with associating with this group over here? Finally, whoever does these, he says, will not be shaken. So in the light of the history of the Old Testament, this Psalm, Psalm 15, is what does a people who have been redeemed from the Exodus and who've been given the law of God, what do these people look like? And you can see that there's a lot of positive traits here, and there's a lot of things that we are not encouraged not to do. So what does it mean for us as God's people? Well, I want to reiterate that phrase one more time. That when people walk into First Baptist, they should see a little bit of what heaven is like. How we treat one another, how we respond to one another, and when they're with us, when we're out there. How do we speak of our fellow believers? If someone were to ask you, well, do you know, what's your church like? Or, do you know this person? I think they go to your church. What do you say? What do I say? Do we speak words that can uplift? If we have to do the tough love thing, have to do the confrontation thing, do we do it in a biblical way? Matthew 18, right? If someone sins against you, you go and tell him his fault between you and him or her alone. That's the first step. That's never the first step that we do. Well, a lot of times it's not. I shouldn't say never. Okay. 2 words. I've been married 39 years, and I should know that you never say always, you never say never. Okay? You always do that. You never do. No, don't say those. Okay? That's something that we struggle to do, is to go and speak to that person. That's something that we need to do. So who may dwell? Okay? You're in the family of God. If you trusted Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord, you're in. Now it's not about whether you get in or out. It's about now that you're in, how do you live? Let's pray. Father, thank you for your encouragement that you are to us. Thank you for this psalm and for the message that it communicates to us. I pray that you will help us indeed to live lives that are holy and godly and pleasing to you. That we may be those who are worthy to live in your holy tent, to dwell in your mountain. We pray all this in Jesus' name.